a fourth plane takes off, and that's United Airlines 93. It takes off and it intercepts the path of 175, more or less here. It's just a little bit behind they're very close to each other at this point here, and then it goes over here. We'll be talking more about that. This plane took off 25 minutes late, okay? I find that interesting because I said that whoever's planning the hijackings, the so-called hijackings, I mean, that's something I'm not really going to get into, but who's ever planning the so-called hijackings of the plane could not have known that the planes would take off on time. So what might have been the role of this third plane, which was so close to the World Trade Center? Now, I'm giving you, this is now speculation. I can't prove it, but I suspect that this plane, United Airlines 93, was a backup in case one of these other two planes didn't go into the towers. It was a backup to one of these other two. So that if one of these planes hadn't succeeded, it would have come around and gone into the tower. I think it was very important that the World Trade Center 1 and 2 go down, so they could not miss that possibility. It may have been even the case that the fourth plane, which is American Airlines 77, which took off from Dulles, it also may have been involved with that same possibility of a backup. Indeed, that plane, after it took off, which was before 8:38, went out to the west and then actually made a deviation to the north for several minutes and then continued to the west. And the time it made the deviation going to the north is about the time that the second plane hits, which suggests that it was verifying that the attack had succeeded and therefore it could continue. So I'll put it over here. This is the fourth plane. This is American Airlines 77. It takes off, has a deviation, something like that, and continues to the west, and I'll be talking more about that. There's people who've done serious research about where the planes made deviations, and I guess I can't go through it, but let me just say that there's a whole radar map around the eastern seaboard of the United States, and there's holes in the radar. And all the deviations of the planes and where the transponders went off were circumstances where there was a hole in the radar. And some people, and I'm not suggesting it myself, I'm just putting it on the table of discussion, some people suggest that there was a swapping of planes. In other words, that the four planes that actually took off weren't the final planes that arrived in the targets. I'm not saying that's what happened, but there is something to work on the issue of the holes in the radar as being the places. For example, Griffiths Air Force Base is a place where there's a building without any windows, which is an old out-of-service Air Force Base that might have had something to do with controlling another plane coming in and substituting. I'm not saying that happened. I'm saying that there's an outstanding issue on these holes in the radar. Just report that this American Airlines 77 turns around, and there's, according to the official story, there's a period of 25 minutes here where it's out of that's what they say, it's out of radar. So they don't know what they claim. They don't know what was going on for the 25 minutes, and then it gets close to the Pentagon, and according to Mineta, who's the Secretary of Transportation at the time, who in his testimony before the 9/11 Commission report, Cheney is interrogated, do the orders still stand, when he learns that 50 miles away an object is coming toward the Pentagon. And Cheney's answer, of course, the orders still stand. The person who asked him goes out of the room, comes back in a few minutes later and says it's now 30 miles away. Do the orders still stand? And Cheney says it very emphatically, yes, the orders still stand, suggesting that the order must have been not to shoot down this object that's coming in, rather than the opposite, because the opposite would have been what you would have expected. Furthermore, the Pentagon did not have any of its own missile defense forces getting into place, which would have shot down the plane that was coming toward the Pentagon, which could have suggested that the object that was coming in was an object which was a military object, in which it identified, the friend-foe identification identified the object coming in as a friend, not a foe, and therefore the missiles didn't go off. So this occurs at 9:38, and United Airlines 93, which crashes eventually in Pennsylvania, goes down at 10:06. Now let me turn to the issue about cell phones, and this is where I'm having some differences with David Ray Griffin, and that's what, I'm trying to do a more intense discussion than I usually would do. Initially, a lot of the people in the 9/11 Truth Movement thought that it was really significant that a lot of the stories said passengers were calling from cell phones to family members or to airline personnel or whatever. They were doing cell phone calls telling of the danger. One of the planes for which that is most significant is United Airlines 93, because there's movies about it. You see people calling from cell phones in the movies. There was a lot of press reports that so-and-so was calling from a cell phone. Sometimes it's an air phone, but very often it's reported as a cell phone. So some of us in the 9/11 Truth Movement, including myself, I went on flights in that portion of the country. I went on flights from Buffalo to Albany, for example, or I went from Buffalo to Detroit to St. Louis, and I tried, in spite of what they tell me to do, I turned on my cell phone, okay, and it wasn't working. Or it would connect for, at 20,000 feet, it would connect for, you would see it connected for a second, and then it'd go away for quite quickly. At the beginning, I didn't have enough courage to actually try to call somebody, because I just saw that it was going off, so I figured that was enough. Later, somebody said, no, you actually really even have to go further and try and make the call. I tried to make the call, and I couldn't make any calls at all. But other people, a guy named Dooney, did much more serious investigation, came to this much more scientific conclusion that, in fact, cell phone calls were not possible at that point. Now, why is this all important? Because the 9/11 Truth Movement a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, was really focusing on the inability to make cell phone calls, and basically was saying that the government was lying about the issue, or the reports were lying about the issue, that those calls could have been made. And I would accept that, okay? The problem is that when we get to the Moussaoui trial, which actually comes out right after the first edition of this book, so it's what I'm telling you now is incorporated in updates, which are in the soft cover edition, but not in the hardcover edition of the book. In the Moussaoui trial, the government, I think it's the FBI, actually produces evidence of which calls were cell phones and which were air phones. And suddenly we're kind of really surprised, because the government claims that in Flight 93 there's only 2 cell phone calls made, and they're the 2 cell phone calls which are in the last 1 minute or 2 minutes, the ones closest to the ground, and therefore it's really reasonable that those phone calls could have been made from cell phones, and therefore they said that all the other calls were made from air phones. Now this is where David Ray Griffin and I have a little bit of difference. I have a little bit, I kind of relax a little bit on whether the media reported that it was a cell phone or an air phone, because I kind of think that either the reporter or the family member describing it could have thought it was a cell phone, but it was actually an air phone. But it's true that the reports did report in some cases cell phones. And so if you want to nail the contradiction between the news reports and the Moussaoui trial document, you can, okay? But there's only one case that I think you can really nail it down, and that's the phone calls from Tom Burnett to his wife, Dina Burnett. The government says there were, and this is in the Moussaoui trial, there were 3 calls. Dina Burnett wrote a book which was published before the Moussaoui trial documents came out. She said there were 4 calls. But much more important is the timing is different, and she says that I looked at my phone and it was Tom's cell phone. She says it more than once. It's absolutely in print. Anybody in this room can read it. that she said she received cell phones from her